helpless, ashamed, exposed. Don't. Someone might see. Claire's voice cracked under the hot Wyoming sun. Her wrist stretched high above her head where a pine branch bent low over Shallow Creek. The rope bit deep. Every breath pulled her shoulders tighter. Her dress was torn and filthy, the kind of damage meant to humiliate, not just hurt. 6 miles from the nearest ranch, 7 from South Pass City, no road in sight. Only rock, pine, and silence. A man was on his knees in the creek, both hands gripping her calves, holding her weight off the rope. From a distance, it looked wrong. It looked like something a decent man would never admit to seeing. She twisted, humiliated more than afraid. Don't, please. Elias didn't answer at first. He adjusted his stance in the creek bed. Boots wedged against slick stone so her wrists wouldn't tear further. He wasn't touching her for himself. He was holding her so the rope wouldn't rip flesh. The wind shifted. Up in the trees, a flock of birds lifted suddenly, wings beating hard against the sky. Elias noticed. He didn't reach for the rope. He didn't reach for her body either. Instead, he slipped off his deerskin coat. Slow, deliberate, he wrapped it around her waist and legs, covering the torn fabric, shielding her from the open air and any watching eyes. Only then did he draw his knife. Only after she was covered did he cut her down. The rope snapped loose. She collapsed forward, knees buckling. He caught her by the shoulders and stepped back immediately, giving her space. "You're safe for the moment," he said. Not gentle, not soft, just steady. Behind them, brush shifted. 3 men stepped out from the trees. Shotgun, rifle. One with nothing but a grin. No outlaw left bait unattended. Clara hadn't been left there to die. She'd been left there to scream, to hang just long enough for someone honorable to step into the open. And Elias had stepped exactly where they wanted him. Now the creek was no longer quiet. Clara stumbled toward a boulder. Elias shifted with her, placing his body between her and the tree line. He didn't draw first. He waited. The man with the shotgun stepped closer. "Appreciate you saving us the trouble," he said. Elias glanced at the rope lying in the water. The knot told him more than the guns did. Not a ranch hand's tie, not a drifter's work. It was a freight knot, quick release, tight and practiced, the kind used around blasting crates in mining camps near South Pass City. That meant money. That meant someone organized. Clara's breathing was ragged. She grabbed a splintered stick from the creek bed and held it up, hands shaking. For a second she looked at Elias like he might turn on her. He didn't react. "If I was with them," he said calmly, "you wouldn't be standing." The shotgun lifted. Elias finally moved. He stepped sideways in the shallow water, forcing the armed man to adjust footing on loose stone. He was 52, not young, not reckless, but he had once worn a badge in that very town 7 miles down the pass. He had buried that badge along with a piece of his life. And he knew how men like this thought. They wanted his horse, his rifle, maybe the girl. The first shot cracked across the creek. It missed wide. Elias drew and fired once, not wild, measured. This tale comes from frontier accounts and local lore, retold with care, and shaped with a few added details to highlight the lesson in the heart. The visuals in this video are AI made to help you feel the place and the moment. If you're still here, you're the kind of listener these old stories were meant for, so drop a comment and ride with me. Now hear this. That third man didn't just vanish. He moved like somebody with orders, not hunger. Elias watched the brush where he'd gone, and he didn't like how quiet it got. Quiet meant distance. Distance meant a rifle could be set up without a word. Clara kept her eyes on Elias, still unsure what kind of man she'd just met. He didn't try to win her trust with comfort. He checked the tree line, then the rocks, then the water, like he was counting places a bullet could come from. Then he saw it, a single boot print cleaner than the rest. Set back from the fight. Somebody had been watching the whole time, somebody who didn't want to get wet. The man with the shotgun dropped, clutching his shoulder. The second outlaw rushed too fast and slipped in the gravel. Elias kicked the rifle from his grip. The third vanished back into the trees. That was the one Elias worried about. The smart one reported back. Clara stared at him. "You knew they'd be here." I knew no one leaves bait alone, he answered. Her face tightened. They told me you'd come. That stopped him. He looked at her fully now. What did you say? They said the old lawman still walks this trail. Said if they strung me up here, you wouldn't ride past. Long silence settled between them. Wind River whispered over stone. He hadn't worn a badge in years. He hadn't stepped inside South Pass City unless he had to. But someone down there still remembered his habit. Still knew which trail he took when hunting. Still knew he couldn't ignore a woman hanging from a tree. This wasn't random. This wasn't hunger. This was a message. He scanned the ridgeline. The narrow pass behind them was the only clean route back toward town. One choke point, one way in, one way out. And Clara had been hung right in the center of it. You got family, he asked. My brother. Tommy's, where in town? Hiding. That confirmed it. This was bigger than a roadside ambush. This was pressure. The surviving outlaw would carry word back to whoever paid them, back to whoever knew Elias would kneel in a creek to protect a stranger's dignity before cutting her free. Clara pulled the coat tighter around herself. You could have left me. Yes, he said, but you didn't. He holstered his revolver slowly. Stand up straight, he told her. We're not done yet. She managed to steady her feet. In the distance, far down the pass, a faint echo of another shot carried on the wind. Not close, not random. A signal. Elias felt the weight of something he thought he'd buried years ago. Responsibility. Whoever planned this had counted on his honor. They had chosen the girl carefully. I'd chosen the creek, chosen the trail. The question was not whether he would fight. The question was who in South Pass City knew him well enough to turn his own code against him, and how far they were willing to go next. Clara's words still hung in the air. They told me you'd come. Elias didn't like the sound of that. Men like him survived by being forgotten, by walking quiet trails, by not giving anyone a reason to remember the way he thought or the way he moved. Yet somebody in South Pass City remembered exactly which pass he rode in summer, exactly which creek he crossed when the heat got heavy. He bent and picked up his coat from around Clara's shoulders, then draped it back over her properly. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded, though her wrists were swelling and her knees still trembled. That smart one, Elias said quietly, glancing toward the trees. He's not running scared. He's running to report. Claire swallowed. To who? That's what we're about to find out. He led her upstream instead of back toward the main trail. Older men didn't win fights by charging forward. They won by thinking one move ahead. The creek curved through stone and brush, shallow enough to hide tracks for a while. Elias stepped in the water deliberately, guiding Clara to do the same. Cold water stung her scraped legs, but she didn't complain. He respected that. After a few minutes, he spoke again. How long they had you? Since yesterday evening. They hurt you. She hesitated. No. That word carried weight. It meant something. They had tied her, humiliated her, left her visible. But they hadn't gone further. That wasn't mercy. That was planning. They needed you whole, Elias muttered. She looked at him. For you? He didn't answer. They moved through the trees until the creek narrowed and split around a fallen log. Elias finally stepped out of the water. He crouched, studying the mud near the bank. Boot prints. 3 sets he already knew, and a 4th, cleaner, better leather. Someone who hadn't stepped into the creek, someone who stayed back and watched. That meant leadership. That meant this wasn't just hungry mountain trash. Clara leaned against a tree, breathing steadier now. You were really a lawman, she asked. Long time ago. Why'd you quit? He almost smiled. Sometimes you don't quit. Sometimes the town quits you. He stood and scanned the ridgeline again. Wind River stretched behind them like a quiet promise. South Pass City waited ahead like a bad memory. The gold had played out years ago, but land and water rights still made men mean. When the boom dies, paperwork becomes the new weapon. When the veins ran dry, water and paper became the only gold left. 7 miles wasn't far on horseback, on foot. With enemies moving faster, it felt longer. You said your brother's hiding, he said. Yes. Tommy works odd jobs near the livery. He keeps his head down. Does he have the paper? She nodded. In his boot. That was almost funny. Elias had hidden warrants the same way once. Simple tricks survived longer than clever ones. They started moving again, this time angling toward higher ground. From elevation, you saw trouble before trouble saw you. Halfway up the ridge, a distant gunshot echoed again. Single, measured, a signal. Claire stopped walking. They're telling someone. Yes. Are we going back to town? Elias looked down toward the narrow pass. If he took her deeper into the mountains, they might survive. But whoever planned this would simply circle through town and squeeze the boy. He had seen that pattern before. Pressure the weak, force the strong to respond. They expect me to run, he said. Claire's voice steadied. Will you? He studied her face. Young, scared, but not foolish. No. He crouched and checked his revolver. 2 shots fired, 4 left. He reloaded calmly from the pouch at his belt. Hand steady. Age had taken speed from him. It hadn't taken rhythm. You ride, he asked. Not well. You'll ride today. They circled wide and reached the small clearing where he had tied his horse earlier that morning. The animal lifted its head and snorted softly. Good horse. Didn't panic at distant gunfire. Elias helped Clara mount first. He swung up behind her, keeping the coat wrapped around her legs. He didn't crowd her, didn't speak more than needed. The trail down the ridge was narrow and dusty. Loose shale shifted under the horse's hooves. He kept the pace steady, not rushed. Men in a hurry made mistakes. As they neared the bend where the pass narrowed, Elias slowed the horse again. He listened. Nothing. No birds lifting, no brush snapping. But that didn't mean clear. It meant waiting. He guided the horse off the main track and into a shallow dip between rocks. From there, he could see the trail without being seen easily. After a minute, 2 riders appeared below. Not the men from the creek. These wore town jackets. One carried himself stiff like someone who'd worn a badge too long. Clara stiffened. I know him, she whispered. Deputy Harlan. Elias felt something settle into place. Mining knots, town jackets, signal shots. It wasn't random. It wasn't just Blackwood hiding in caves. It was cooperation. And that meant the rot ran deeper than brush bandits. The riders paused near the creek where Clara had hung. They looked around. One dismounted. He studied the cut rope. Even from this distance, Elias could see his jaw tighten. They're disappointed, Clara whispered. Yes, Elias said. Means we did something right. He watched a little longer, confirming they moved off toward town rather than into the hills. That told him enough. They weren't hunting blindly. They were checking whether the trap had worked, and now they knew it hadn't. Listen carefully, Elias said. We ride into town before sunset. Clara looked at him like he'd lost sense. Isn't that what they want? Yes. Then why? Because men like that get nervous when you walk through the front door instead of sneaking around back. He nudged the horse forward. South Pass City shimmered faintly in the afternoon haze, and that shimmer wasn't just heat. It was time running out. If that smart outlaw reached town first, Tommy would be the next rope. Elias knew how men like Caldwell worked. They didn't kill you in the street when the sun was up. They wrote you out of your own life with ink. Then they sent someone else to do the dirty part after dark. He leaned close enough for Clara to hear him over the horse's breathing. When we get there, don't look scared, he said. Look tired. Tired makes you invisible. Clara swallowed and nodded. She didn't feel invisible. She felt like a target. Smoke from chimneys, dust rising from wagons. Underneath, something else. As they rode, Elias felt the old weight returning. The part of him that read rooms before stepping in. The part that counted exits. The part that remembered every face that had ever lied to him. Clara shifted slightly in front of him. Are you afraid? She asked. He considered that. Yes, he said honestly, but not for me. That answer stayed with her. The town drew closer. Whatever waited there had planned carefully. Had chosen the creek. Had chosen her. Had counted on his code. Now they would see whether they had counted wrong. If you're still riding with this story, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. Pour yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're listening from, and which town you call home. South Pass City was just ahead, and someone inside it had just realized the old lawman was coming back. South Pass City didn't look like a town hiding rot. It looked ordinary, dust hanging in warm air, a wagon creaking past the general store, Two men arguing over feed prices like nothing in the world was wrong. That was how towns hid things. Out in the open. Elias slowed the horse before reaching the main street. He didn't ride in fast. Didn't ride in quiet either. He rode in steady. Let them see him. Clara felt it first. Eyes from the saloon porch, from the barber chair by the window, from the shadow beside the bank door. People remembered him. Some straightened up, some looked away too quickly. That him a man muttered near the hitching rail. Elias pretended not to hear. He helped Clara down carefully. She stood taller now, coat still around her shoulders, wrists wrapped in a strip torn from the lining. She wasn't shaking anymore. That mattered. Across the street, Deputy Harlan stepped out from the marshal's office, hat low, jaw tight. He wasn't smiling. Didn't expect to see you back, Harlan said. Elias kept his tone even. Didn't expect to be invited. A couple of townsfolk paused nearby. Nobody liked tension in daylight, and it meant trouble might spill where children could see it. Harlan's eyes flicked to Clara. Ma'am. You all right? Clara answered before Elias could. I was tied to a tree 6 miles up the pass. Murmurs. That moved through the street like wind through dry grass. Harlan cleared his throat. Bandits get bold this time of year. Elias watched him closely. Bandits don't usually tie knots like freight crews. That landed. Just enough. Harlan's mouth twitched, then steadied. You accusing someone? Not yet. That was true. He didn't accuse without proof, but he was counting reactions, and Harlan was counting too. A door opened behind them. Mrs. Duchenne stepped out from her boarding house across the way. Small woman, sharp eyes. She looked at Clara first, not Elias. That girl needs water, she said firmly. No argument. Just fact. Elias nodded once. Appreciate it. Harlan didn't stop them. That was interesting. If Clara was bait and the trap failed, the next move would be control, silence her, or scare her. Instead, they were allowed to walk. That meant whoever planned this believed they were still ahead. Inside the boarding house, it was cooler. Smelled like tea and soap. Mrs. Chen closed the door gently. Upstairs, she said. No one listens well when they think walls are thinned. Clara sat at the small table while Mrs. Chen poured water and examined her wrists. Elias stood near the window, watching the street through a crack in the curtain. Deputy Harlan asked about you yesterday. Mrs. Chen said quietly. Elias didn't turn. What did he want? Wanted to know if you still ride the North Trail. Clara looked up sharply. They knew. Yes, Elias said. They knew. Mrs. Chen wrapped Clara's wrist tighter. You plan to stay? She asked Elias. For now. That earned him a long look. You bring Storm with you. Storm was already here. He stepped back from the window. Where's the boy? Clara answered. Tommy works by the livery. Mrs. Chen nodded once. He's smart. Keeps quiet. That won't last, Elias said. Outside, a wagon rattled past. Normal sounds? Too normal. Elias had learned something long ago. When trouble comes to town, it doesn't start loud. It starts polite. It asks questions. It pretends concern. He turned back to Clara. Listen carefully, he said. You do not walk alone. Not to the well. Not to the church. Not anywhere. She nodded. You think they'll try again? They won't use rope next time. That silence hung heavier than any gunshot. Mrs. Chen folded her hands. You were law here, she said softly. Once, people still remember. That's the problem. He stepped toward the door. I'm going to see the livery. Clara stood quickly. I'm coming. No, she stiffened. You don't get to leave me behind. There it was. Not fear. Stubbornness. He almost smiled. Fine, he said, but you stay 2 steps behind me. They stepped back into the sunlight. The town hadn't changed in 10 minutes, but the air felt tighter near the livery. A couple of ranch hands stopped talking when Elias approached. Inside, the smell of hay and leather wrapped around them. Tommy stood near a stall, brushing down a horse twice his size. He froze when he saw Clara. Clara. She rushed to him, hugging him tight. Elias watched the doorway. Always the doorway. Tommy pulled back. You shouldn't be here, the boy whispered. That's what they told you? Elias asked. Tommy's eyes flicked to him. Yes, sir. Who's they? The boy hesitated. Then he glanced toward the street. Man from the bank. And Deputy Harlan. That settled the last doubt. Bank meant money. Money meant land. Land meant power. Elias crouched to Tommy's level. You still got the paper? Tommy nodded. In my boot. Good. Elias stood again. He could feel it now. The pattern. The rope in the creek. The deputy asking questions. The bank man leaning close to a scared boy. This wasn't about random bandits. This was about pressure, control, and making sure certain land changed hands quietly. Clara looked at him. What now? Elias glanced across the street. The bank doors were open. Polished brass handle catching the sun. Someone inside believed they were safe. Believed an old lawman would stay in the hills. Elias adjusted his hat slightly. Now, he said calmly, we walk through that bank door. And inside that building was a man who thought he owned this town. And he had no idea the mountain had just walked back in. The bank doors stood open like nothing inside had ever lied. Polished wood, clean windows, a brass handle shining in the sun as if honesty lived behind it. Elias crossed the street without hurry. Claire and Tommy walked just behind him. He didn't look left or right, didn't need to. He could feel the town watching. Inside, the air was cooler. Smelled of paper, ink, and money. Two clerks froze mid-motion when they saw him. Behind the main desk stood the man who held more land notes than anyone within 50 miles. Mayor Caldwell, banker, smiling when it suited him. His smile came easy now. Well, I'll be, Caldwell said, spreading his hand slightly. Elias Carter thought the mountains swallowed you whole. Elias removed his hat slowly. They tried, he said. Didn't take. Caldwell's eyes shifted briefly to Clara, then to Tommy. That flicker was small, but it was there. Concern. Not for them, for what they carried. Can I help you folks? Caldwell asked. Tommy shifted his weight. Clara stood straighter. Elias stepped forward just enough to control the space. Deputy Harlan been asking about my trail, Elias asked casually. Caldwell chuckled. Law keeps track of everyone. Keeps us safe. Elias nodded once. Funny kind of safety. A clerk swallowed hard. The room felt tight. Caldwell leaned his palms on the counter. You come here to make accusations. Elias, no. Elias looked him in the eye. I came to understand why a girl was tied to a tree on a pass-I ride. Silence settled heavy. Caldwell didn't blink. Bandits, he said smoothly. Unfortunate truth of frontier life. Bandits don't usually coordinate with deputies. That hit cleaner. Caldwell's jaw stiffened for a fraction of a second. Then the smile returned. You suggesting corruption? I'm suggesting coincidence is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Clara's breathing slowed. She was listening. Learning how men spoke when bullets weren't flying yet. Caldwell straightened. You've been gone a long time. Elias. Town moves on. Land changes hands. Debts get settled. There a debt you think this family owes? Elias asked quietly. Caldwell's eyes flicked again to Tommy's boots. There it was. He knew. He knew the paper existed. He just didn't know where. Tommy shifted slightly behind Clara. Elias caught that movement. Good boy. Caldwell stepped around the desk. Not too close, just enough to seem friendly. Let's not do this in public, he said. Come by my office later. We'll sort it civil. Civil. Elias had heard that word before, right before things stopped being civil at all. He placed his hat back on his head. Maybe I will, he said calmly. He turned and walked toward the door. Clara hesitated. Why are we leaving? She whispered once they stepped outside. Because he's not scared yet, Elias answered. Tommy looked confused, but he knows. Yes, Elias said, and now he knows we know. They didn't stop walking. Across the street, Deputy Harlan pretended to examine a notice board. His posture too stiff, his attention too sharp. Elias paused just long enough to catch his eye. Harlan looked away first. That told him enough. Where now? Clara asked. Now we wait, Elias said. For what? For them to move. He guided them back toward Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Waiting wasn't weakness. Waiting forced the other side to act. Inside. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting as Elias explained in short, steady sentences. She poured tea. Simple action. Steady hands. You stirred a hornet nest, she said finally. They were already awake. Elias replied. Tommy sat at the table, boots planted firm. I won't give it to them, the boy said quietly. Elias studied him. I know. Outside. Footsteps passed more often than usual. Voices lower, doors closing a little harder, pressure building. Late afternoon light stretched long across the floorboards. Elias stood by the window again. A wagon stopped in front of the bank. Two men he recognized from the creek stepped down, not limping anymore. That meant someone paid for quick treatment. Money moved fast when power was involved. They're gathering, Clara said softly. Yes. Are we in danger right now? Elias considered. Yes, he said. But so are they. That earned him a faint smile from Mrs. Chen. He turned back toward the door. I'm going to step out. Clara rose immediately. You said I don't walk alone. You don't, he replied. But I do. She didn't like that. He saw it. But sometimes one man walking alone told the whole town something important. He stepped back into the street. The sun was lower now, shadows longer. He walked straight toward the marshal's office this time. No detours, no hesitation. Harlan stood inside. Caldwell was already there. That was fast. Too fast. They'd been waiting. Elias pushed the door open. It creaked louder than it should have. Evening, he said evenly. Harlan's hand rested near his belt. Caldwell's smile was thinner now. You making trouble? Harlan asked. Elias shook his head slightly. No. He stepped fully inside. I'm ending it. Outside. A small crowd had begun to gather without meaning to. Curiosity pulled them closer. Caldwell glanced toward the window. He didn't like witnesses. That was new. Elias noticed. You tied the wrong girl to the wrong tree, Elias said quietly. Harlan shifted his weight. That's a serious claim. No, Elias replied. It's a serious mistake. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Caldwell's polite mask slipped just a fraction. Careful. Elias, he said. Elias met his gaze without blinking. I am. And in that moment, both sides understood something important. This wasn't about a piece of paper anymore. It was about control of the whole town. And outside that door, the first whisper had already started spreading. The whisper outside the marshal's office didn't die down. It spread, like dry grass catching a slow spark. Elias stepped back out into the street without another word. He didn't slam the door. He didn't threaten. He simply walked away as if he had already made his choice. That unsettled them more than shouting would have. Clara stood near the boardwalk, Tommy beside her. Mrs. Chen, a quiet presence near the steps of her boarding house. People were pretending not to stare. They were not doing a good job of it. Well, Clara asked softly. They're nervous, Elias said. That helps us. Tommy shifted his weight. Deputy Harlan looked like he wanted to draw. He did. Elias replied, but he didn't. Why not too many eyes? That was the first crack in Caldwell's armor. Power liked darkness. Power hated witnesses. Elias motioned for them to walk. Not toward the mountains, not toward the livery. Toward the church at the end of the street. Before they reached it, Elias caught a sound he hadn't heard in years. A tinny click from a telegraph key inside the back room of the general store. Fast, nervous, not a friendly message. He didn't need the words to know what it meant. Someone was calling for help, or calling for muscle. Clara noticed his shoulders tighten. What is it? She asked. Elias didn't answer. He just guided her a little closer to the church steps where the whole town could see them. Because if Caldwell was sending for men, Elias wanted witnesses before the first punch was thrown. Claire looked confused. We praying now? Elias almost smiled. No. The church steps were wide and visible from most of town. He climbed them slowly and turned to face the street. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give a speech. He simply stood there. After a moment, curiosity pulled people closer. Ranch hands, store owners. A couple of miners still dusty from the edge of town. Mrs. Chen joined him on the steps without asking permission. Claire stood on his other side. Tommy just behind. Caldwell remained near the marshal's office, Harlan beside him, watching. Elias finally spoke. 6 miles up the pass, he said evenly. A young woman was tied to a tree yesterday. Murmurs moved through the crowd again. Not robbed, he continued. Not shot. Tied. Visible. He let that sink in. That wasn't random. Silence followed. No one liked the idea of deliberate cruelty near their own road. One older rancher cleared his throat. You got proof of that. Elias shook his head. Not yet. That honesty mattered. But I do know this, he added. The knot used on that rope came from men who handle freight and blasting powder. Not drifters. A miner in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Elias kept going. I also know the deputy asked about my riding trail the day before it happened. Now the air changed. People looked at Harlan. He stiffened. That's a lie, Harlan said sharply. Elias didn't raise his tone. You asked Mrs. Chen. All eyes moved to her. Mrs. Chen didn't hesitate. He did, she said calmly. That was the second crack. Not loud, but real. Caldwell stepped forward now. This is reckless talk, he said smoothly. We have bandits in the hills. We're trying to keep order. Then keep it, Elias replied. Start by explaining why the girl wasn't robbed. That question hung there. No one answered it, because it didn't make sense. If bandits wanted money, they took money. They didn't leave bait. Tommy stepped forward suddenly. Small voice. Clear. They told me to hand over my father's land paper. He said. Clara turned to him in surprise. Elias didn't interrupt. Tommy continued. They said it would make things easier. The crowd shifted again. Land, now they understood. Land was something every man in that street cared about. Caldwell's smile faded. That's enough, he said. Harlan stepped down off the boardwalk, hand hovering near his belt. Elias didn't move. He didn't reach for his revolver. He just stood there in full daylight. Search him, Caldwell said suddenly, pointing at Tommy. That was the mistake. Not because they would find nothing, but because it was too eager, too hungry. The crowd murmured louder now. The rancher from earlier stepped forward. On what grounds, he asked. Caldwell hesitated. Town safety. That boy ain't done nothing. The rancher replied. More nods, not loud, but visible. Elias felt it, the shift. It was small, but towns turned on small things. Harlan's hand lowered slightly. Caldwell realized he had pushed too fast. He stepped back. We'll handle this properly, he said. Elias finally spoke again. You tried to scare them into signing, he said quietly. When that failed, you tried pressure. Caldwell's eyes hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then let's check the books, Elias said. That landed like a thrown stone. Silence. Books meant records. Records meant signatures. Dates. Debts. The kind of things that didn't lie easily. Caldwell's face went still. You have no authority here, he said. Maybe not. Elias answered. But truth does. That word settled heavier than any accusation. Truth. People wanted it, even when they feared it. The sun dipped lower. Long shadows stretched across the street. The crowd didn't disperse as quickly as Caldwell expected. That bothered him. He turned and walked back toward the bank without another word. Harlan followed, but not as confidently as before. Clara exhaled slowly. Did we win? She asked. Elias shook his head. No. What was that then? That was them realizing this won't stay quiet. Tommy looked up at him. Will they stop? Elias looked toward the bank doors. They were closed now. Locked. Too early for closing time. No, he said. They won't stop. Miss Chen folded her hands. Then what will they do? Elias watched as two men slipped around the back alley behind the bank. Moving fast, not wanting to be seen. They'll move tonight, he said quietly. Claire's stomach tightened. Against us? Yes. He stepped down from the church steps. Go inside. Lock the doors. No lights near windows. Tommy swallowed hard. And you, Elias, adjusted his hat slightly. I'm going to see how desperate a powerful man gets when he thinks he's about to lose everything. 'Cause when men like Caldwell stopped smiling, they didn't talk. They acted. Night came down slow over South Pass City. Too slow. The kind of evening where men made decisions they would regret by morning. Elias stood in the narrow alley beside the bank, back against cool brick, listening, not looking, listening, inside. Faint voices moved behind closed walls, drawers sliding, metal clinking, paper shifting, not the sounds of a business closing, the sounds of something being gathered. He had told Clara to lock the doors at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. No lamps near the windows, no shadows against curtains. He trusted she would listen. He trusted the boy, too. What he didn't trust was desperation. A rear door creaked. Elias didn't move. Two men stepped out carrying a wooden crate between them. Heavy, careful. One of them was from the creek, shoulder wrapped in fresh cloth, so Caldwell had paid for quick treatment and quick loyalty. The crate was loaded onto a wagon already waiting in the alley. No lanterns lit, no words spoken louder than necessary. That told Elias something important. This was not about arresting anyone. This was about moving something before dawn. Records, ledgers, ears, proof. He stepped away from the wall just enough to see better. Deputy Harlan appeared at the far end of the alley. Hat low, scanning, guarding. That sealed it. Caldwell was cleaning house. Elias slipped back into shadow. Older men didn't rush into gunfire. They gathered leverage. The wagon rolled forward quietly, turning toward the north end of town, not the main road, toward the storage sheds near the abandoned freight yard. Smart. Less attention there. Elias moved along the opposite side of the buildings, staying parallel. He kept distance, kept patience. The wagon stopped near a long, low shed that once stored blasting supplies for the early mining crews. Most folks forgot it was still there. Elias had not. He watched as the crate was carried inside. Harlan remained outside, rifle resting against his shoulder, waiting, guarding the secret. Elias didn't draw. Not yet. He stepped back and circled wider. Approaching from behind the shed where the moonlight barely touched, the wood siding had gap. Old construction. Through one narrow crack, he saw Caldwell himself inside, coat off, sleeves rolled, sweat on his forehead. He was flipping through ledgers fast, tearing pages, feeding them into a small metal barrel. Fire low, controlled. Destroying specific records, not all. Only some. That meant fear. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. This was bigger than Clara's land. If Caldwell was burning books, he was protecting more than one theft. Inside the shed, one of the hired men spoke nervously. "What if Carter talks to the circuit judge?" Caldwell snapped back quietly. "He won't get that far." That line lingered. Elias leaned back from the wall. "Won't get that far." That was not bookkeeping. That was threat. He circled again, stepping deliberately on dirt rather than loose boards. When he reached the front corner of the shed, he made a small sound. Just enough. Harlan turned his head sharply. "What was that?" one of the men inside asked. "Probably a cat." Harlan muttered. Elias stepped into faint moonlight now. Visible, not hiding anymore. Harlan saw him first. Their eyes locked. Neither man spoke. Inside, Caldwell continued burning pages, unaware. Elias finally broke the silence. "Busy night," he said evenly. Harlan stiffened. "You shouldn't be here. Seems like I should." Elias replied. Caldwell froze mid-motion inside the shed. Slowly, he turned. Their eyes met through the open doorway. For a moment, no one moved. The fire crackled softly in the barrel, paper curling, ink disappearing. Caldwell straightened his back. "You're trespassing," he said. Elias stepped closer, not crossing the threshold. "You're destroying evidence." Harlan shifted his rifle slightly. Not raised. "But ready?" Caldwell's voice stayed smooth, though thinner than before. "These are private records. Not if they prove fraud." Elias answered. One of the hired men glanced toward the wagon nervously. He didn't want to be here. Elias could see that. Good. Doubt was contagious. Caldwell stepped forward. "You don't have authority," he said. Elias nodded once. Maybe not. He looked directly at the burning barrel. "But the town does." That word again. Town. Not law. Not badge. Community. Footsteps echoed faintly from the direction of the main street. More than one set. Caldwell heard it too. His eyes flicked past Elias. Lantern light appeared at the far end of the yard. Ranchers, miners, Mrs. Chen among them, Clara beside her, Tommy just behind. They had not stayed locked inside. They had followed. That changed everything. Harlan looked uncertain now. He had not planned for witnesses. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "You brought a crowd," he said quietly. "I didn't." Elias replied, "They came." The fire in the barrel flickered higher as one last page caught flame. Caldwell moved toward it instinctively. Elias stepped forward at the same time, not fast, but firm. Close enough now that Caldwell could see there was no bluff left. Behind them, the townsfolk stopped at the edge of the yard. Lantern light washing over the wagon, over the crate, over the shed. No one shouted. No one drew. They simply watched. Caldwell's power had always lived in shadows. Now he stood in open light. "Open the crate." A rancher called out. Caldwell hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. Harlan lowered his rifle a fraction. Not surrender, but doubt. Elias held Caldwell's gaze. "You tied the wrong girl to the wrong tree," he said again. This time the words carried across the yard, and everyone heard them. Caldwell's mask slipped completely now. For the first time that night, he looked cornered, and desperate men, when cornered, didn't burn paper. They reached for something far worse. Inside the shed, near the back wall, something metallic scraped hard against wood. Not an accident, not loose tools, something being pulled into position. Elias felt it before he saw it. The shift in Caldwell's shoulders, the sudden calm in his eyes. Desperate men reached for something louder than words. "Step away from that barrel," Caldwell said sharply. His voice had lost its smooth edge. Harlan's rifle lifted halfway. Not aimed at Elias, not yet, but ready. Behind Elias, the townsfolk stood frozen in lantern light. Ranchers, miners, Miss Chen holding her lamp steady. Clara stepped forward from the rest. Tommy close to her side. Nobody wanted to be the first to move. Elias didn't turn his back on Caldwell. He spoke without raising his voice. "What's in the shed?" Mayor Caldwell didn't answer. Instead, he nodded once toward the back wall. One of the hired men hesitated, then stepped aside. That was when Elias saw it clearly. A crate of blasting powder, old freight markings still faint along the side, a coil of fuse already unrolled across the dirt floor, not placed by accident, placed with intention. The fuse wasn't lit. It was a threat, a way to make everyone back off. The room tightened. Caldwell's eyes were steady now. "You think you can drag my name through the mud?" he said. "You think you can stir up doubt and walk away clean?" Elias kept his stance relaxed. "You planning to blow up your own shed? Planning to stage an accident that nobody can argue with?" That word landed cold. Behind Elias, Clara understood first. "They're going to blame it on you," she whispered. Caldwell heard her. "That's right," he said evenly. "Old lawman comes back to town angry. Starts trouble. Tries to burn the bank records. Tragic accident." Murmurs broke from the crowd. Harlan's jaw tightened. This was further than he had planned. Too far. Elias glanced once toward the fuse. Long enough to reach the crate. Long enough to take half the shed and anyone inside with it. He looked back at Caldwell. "You're gambling," Elias said. "I don't gamble," Caldwell replied. "I invest." One of the hired men shifted nervously. "You said no one would get hurt," he muttered. Caldwell snapped at him. "Quiet." That was the third crack, doubt spreading through his own side. Elias spoke carefully. "You light that fuse, and this town won't forget what they saw tonight." Caldwell's lips tightened. "They'll remember what I tell them." He reached slowly into his vest pocket. "Not for a gun." "For a match." Harlan finally spoke. "Sir," he said low. Caldwell ignored him. He struck the match. The small flame flared bright in the dark shed. For a second, everything felt still. The crowd gasped softly. Clara stepped forward without thinking. Elias raised his hand slightly behind him, stopping her. He stepped toward Caldwell instead, not rushing, not drawing. "Just closing distance. You burn those books," Elias said quietly. You admit everything. Caldwell held the match near the fuse. You think I care what they believe? Yes, Elias said. That made Caldwell hesitate. Just for a breath. You built your power on their trust. Elias continued. You burned this place down. You burned that too. Silence. The flame trembled slightly in Caldwell's fingers. Outside the shed, the wind shifted. Lantern light flickered across anxious faces. Harlan's rifle lowered another inch. The hired men backed up a step. No one wanted to die for ledger books. Claire's voice broke the tension. You tied me to that tree, she said clearly. Not loud, but steady. And you thought no one would question it. Caldwell's jaw flexed. I never touched you. No, she answered. You just paid someone else to... That hit, because it was true in a way everyone understood. Caldwell's power depended on distance, on clean hands, on others doing the dirty work. Elias stepped close enough now to see the sweat on Caldwell's temple. You still have a choice, he said quietly. Caldwell looked past him at the watching crowd. For the first time, doubt flickered in his own eyes. If he lit the fuse, he might silence evidence, but he would not silence suspicion. And suspicion in a small town lasted longer than smoke. The match burned closer to his fingers, too close. He hissed slightly from the heat. Instinct forced his hand to shift. In that split second, Elias moved. He grabbed Caldwell's wrist and squeezed hard. The match dropped harmlessly into the dirt. Harlan stepped back instinctively instead of forward. That told Elias everything. The hired men backed toward the door. One bolted completely and no loyalty left. Caldwell struggled once, but Elias held firm. Not violently, just steady. You're done playing this quiet, Elias said. Outside, the rancher, who had spoken earlier, stepped forward into the doorway. Open that crate, he demanded again. This time no one stopped him. He moved inside, kicked the lid loose. Inside were more ledgers, stacks of them, marked properties, loans, transfers, names of families everyone in that yard recognized. The crowd shifted again. Now it was not curiosity. It was anger, real and growing. Caldwell looked around and saw it too. The thing he feared most, not a gun, not a fist. But the town itself turning. Harlan removed his badge slowly, not throwing it down, just holding it uncertainly in his hand. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered. Caldwell's shoulders sagged. The mask was gone now. All that remained was a man who had misjudged how far he could push. Elias released his wrist. Sheriff's office in Lander will want a word, Elias said calmly. No one argued. Lantern light flickered across the shed walls. The fuse lay harmless in the dirt. The barrel fire had died down to smoke. It should have been over. It should have ended right there. But as Caldwell stood surrounded, defeated in the open light, a distant gunshot cracked from the far end of town. Not from the shed, from near Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Clara's face drained of color. Tommy's eyes widened. Elias didn't need to turn to know what that meant. Someone else had decided not to wait. The gunshot cracked sharp across the night, not from the freight yard, from the direction of Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Clara didn't wait. She ran. Elias moved faster than a man his age had any right to. Not wild, not reckless, direct. The crowd behind them scattered in confusion, boots pounding wood and dirt. Another shot rang out, closer now. A window shattered somewhere down the street. Stay behind me, Elias said over his shoulder. Not breaking stride. They rounded the corner toward the boarding house. Smoke drifted from the upstairs window. Not thick, not fire yet. Warning, 2 riders were pulling hard on their reins in front of the building. Blackwood men, not Caldwell, not Harlan. The leftovers, the smart one from the creek among them. He had not run to hide. He had run to finish the job. One outlaw dismounted and kicked the front door. Locked. He stepped back and fired into the frame. Wood splintered. Inside, someone screamed. Elias slowed just enough to think. Distance, angle, light. He drew, not with fury, with memory. The first shot he fired hit the lantern hanging from the porch beam above the outlaw's head. Glass burst. Darkness dropped hard across the entrance. The sudden black threw the men off balance. Second shot. Clean. The rider nearest the horses jerked sideways and fell from the saddle. The third outlaw swung around, firing blind toward the street. A bullet tore past Elias's shoulder and thudded into the hitching rail behind him. He stepped left, using the water trough as cover. Clara ducked low behind a wagon wheel without being told. She was learning. The smart outlaw moved fast. He grabbed Tommy from near the alley where the boy had tried to circle wide, one arm around the boy's neck, revolver pressed to his side. Back up. The outlaw shouted, his voice steady, controlled. That was the real danger. Not rage, control. The street froze. Even the townsfolk who had followed from the yard stopped in their tracks. Elias didn't aim at the man's head. Too risky. Too much movement. He lowered his revolver slightly. You don't want the boy, Elias said evenly. I want a clean ride out, the outlaw answered. You won't get far. I don't need far. Tommy's face was pale but still. He didn't cry. Clara's breath shook beside Elias. He could feel her fear like heat. The outlaw edged toward his horse, dragging Tommy with him. Caldwell had miscalculated, but this man had not. He knew when to cut losses. You tie the girl, Elias said calmly. Buying seconds. Wasn't personal. It is now. The outlaw tightened his grip on Tommy. Last chance. Elias glanced once at the horse. Nervous animal. Sweat along its neck, ears twitching at the smell of gunpowder. Good. He shifted his stance just slightly. All right, Elias said. He holstered his revolver slowly, hands visible. The outlaw relaxed half an inch. That was enough. Elias saw the horse's eye rolling white, already spooked by smoke and shouting. He didn't need luck. He needed the animal to do what frightened animals always do. Elias reached behind him, grabbed the water bucket from the trough, and hurled it hard at the horse's face. The splash hit cold and sudden. Cold water hit like a slap, and the horse's nostrils flared at the sudden chill. The horse screamed and reared, hooves clawing the air. Blinded by the cold splash, and the outlaw lost footing for a split second. Tommy dropped low instinctively. Just as Elias drew again, one shot, precise. The outlaw's revolver flew from his hand. He stumbled backward, clutching his wrist. Tommy rolled free and scrambled toward Clara. The remaining rider tried to bolt, but ranchers from the yard had already moved to block the far end of the street. Not brave, just tired of being pushed. The outlaw saw it. Saw no clean exit. He ran instead, toward the open stretch past the church. Elias didn't chase immediately. He checked Tommy first. You hurt? The boy shook his head, just scared. That's allowed. Clara wrapped her arms around him tight. Mrs. Chen emerged from the boarding house doorway, coughing but steady. They fired through the window, she said, trying to draw someone out. Smoke drifted from inside, but no flames had caught. The damage was loud, not fatal. Elias looked down the street. The fleeing outlaw was already nearing the edge of town. If he reached the dark beyond the churchyard, he might vanish into the hills, and if he vanished, this would not end tonight. Elias picked up his pace, not sprinting, measured. He had hunted longer trails than this. The outlaw glanced back once and fired over his shoulder. The shot went wide, fear creeping in now. Good. They reached the edge of town where dirt met open field. Moonlight clearer there. No more buildings to hide behind. Just open ground and a narrow road climbing toward the ridge. The outlaw mounted a loose horse tied near the fence and kicked it hard. The animal bolted toward the pass. Elias stopped. He didn't have a clear shot. Too much distance, too much risk. He lowered his gun slowly. Clara came up beside him. You're letting him go, for now, Elias said. The outlaw disappeared into the dark slope beyond town, but he was not riding free. He was riding scared, and scared men made mistakes behind them. The town had gathered again, this time not curious, not uncertain, angry. Caldwell was being held at the freight yard. Harlan under watch, the crate of ledgers open for all to see. The town had shifted, but the hills were still wide, and one man who knew too much about the rope, the plan, and the signal shots was riding into them. Elias watched the ridge a long moment. Then he turned back toward the lantern light and the people who had finally chosen a side. It's not finished, he said quietly, 'cause somewhere up that dark pass, The last man who tied that knot was planning his next move. The ridge stayed dark long after the outlaw disappeared into it. Elias stood there a moment longer than he needed to. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood something most men only learn after they lose too much. You do not chase every shadow. You finish what is in front of you first. He turned back toward town. Lantern light flickered along the street. Men who had once looked away now stood firm. Caldwell was under watch. Harlan sat on the church steps, badge resting in his open palm like something heavier than metal. Claire held Tommy close, but she was not trembling anymore. She was steady, different from the girl tied to a tree. The town had shifted in a single night, not because of bullets, not because of shouting, but because someone chose not to look away. Elias walked slowly back toward the center of it all. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand thanks. He simply said, "It's not finished, but it started. And sometimes, in a hard life, that is enough." Caldwell would face the circuit judge. The ledgers would be examined. Land would return to rightful hands. It would take time. Justice in the West was rarely quick, but it moved when people stood together. Claire stepped beside Elias as the crowd thinned. "You could have stayed in the mountains," she said. "Yes," he answered. "You almost did." "Yes." She studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you, Elias, look down the street where children were peeking from doorways, where ranchers were speaking in low, steady voices instead of whispers?" "'Cause if I had," he said quietly, "I would have had to live with that. That was the truth. Not bravery, not pride. Just the simple weight of knowing when you walked past something you should have stopped." Later that night, when the town finally grew quiet, Elias stood alone outside Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The stars over Wyoming were wide and patient. He thought about the rope at the creek, the match in Caldwell's hand, the moment he almost turned away years ago when his badge stopped feeling like honor and started feeling like burden. He realized something important. Honor is not a badge. It is not a position. It is not what a town calls you. Honor is what you do when no one is watching, and sometimes when everyone is. Clara joined him on the porch. Her wrists were wrapped clean now. Healing would take time, but healing had begun. "You going back to the mountain?" she asked. He thought about it. The quiet cabin, the long mornings, the safety of distance. He had hidden there for years, believing peace meant isolation, but tonight had shown him something else. Peace sometimes meant standing in the street and saying enough. "I don't know," he said honestly. She smiled slightly. "You do." He did. He just wasn't ready to say it yet. As for the outlaw on the ridge, the telegraph was already working against him. And a marshal would follow that trail at first light, not by one man chasing alone, but by a town no longer willing to be divided. Fear lost its grip when people stopped whispering. And that is where the real story rests, not in the gunshots, not in the burning ledgers, but in the choice to stand when it would have been easier to sit. Now let me step out of the story for a moment. If you're listening to this, maybe you have your own mountain. Maybe you stepped away from something because it hurt. Maybe you told yourself it was easier to stay quiet. I understand that more than you might think. There have been times in my own life when walking away felt safer than speaking up. There were seasons when I thought keeping my head down meant keeping peace. But I learned something the hard way. Silence protects comfort. It rarely protects truth. I have seen men lose more to regret than they ever lost to a fight. I have seen good people shrink because they believed their voice didn't matter. And I have seen ordinary folks change everything simply by refusing to look the other way. So here's the question I leave with you. What rope are you walking past right now? What wrong have you convinced yourself is not your responsibility? Who in your life needs you to step forward instead of stepping aside? Elias was not the strongest man in that town. He was not the youngest. He didn't hold office. He didn't even carry authority anymore. All he carried was a choice, and in that choice changed everything. You do not need a badge to live with honor. You do not need a title to protect what is right. You only need the courage to act when the moment comes. And yes, that courage costs something. It costs comfort. It costs ease. Sometimes it costs reputation. But what it gives back is far greater. It gives you peace when you lay your head down at night. It gives you the strength to look at yourself without flinching. It gives you the kind of legacy that lasts longer than land papers or bank ledgers. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred something steady inside your chest, take a second to like this video. Not for numbers, but because it tells the platform these stories still matter. And if you want more stories about courage, about hard choices, about the kind of honor that does not fade with age, then subscribe and ride along. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Was it the creek, the match, the moment the town chose to stand? And more importantly, Sal, what are you choosing in your own life right now? Because somewhere in your world, someone is watching how you respond. Some young Tommy's learning what courage looks like. Some Clara is hoping someone will not walk past. And maybe, just maybe, the mountain in front of you is not there to hide behind. Maybe it is there to climb. The ridge was quiet that night, but the town was awake. And once people wake up to truth, they rarely go back to sleep. And the man who rode into the ridge learned something too. You can't outrun a town that finally found its spine.